Welcome back. This is where we left off from the previous one. Now, back to the theme of using outlines in sort of a deliberate way. I just outlined the tent there on the top side. Why? Because the top side is separate from the ground, but the bottom side is actually flat on the ground. So that's why the outline disappears there. It's just kind of like a cleverish way. I must have seen this somewhere done by another artist, and I probably thought, wow, that's interesting. I'm spending most of the time on this one with the water and adding elements later on, fixing the trees and adding elements for later on. So here you can see me fixing some of these edges on the grass. And these are really me just sort of solving the way that they're going to interact with each other, how the grass is going to transition to dirt, how the grass is going to look where it's completely lit, are there going to be any shapes. And right now what I'm doing is solving the part of the color of the cliff. You know, I'm doing the cleaning up. And the good thing about the water is that I can simulate those ripples, and those kind of break that surface. The dark tone you see there next to the cliff, that's the reflection of the cliff on the water. But by having those ripples, I can play around with light and kind of go like, well, but the water is distorted here, so I can have lighter shades. And that still works because it's justified by the sort of the behavior of water and reflections. Again, I'm not really too big on the math of the reflections, but if it looks at least convincing, then that's good enough. And in this part as well, I'm trying to get the edge on the top, the transition between the grass and the cliff to make sense, both in shading and in color. So I want the grass to transition into a dull dirt color, but not too bright. I'm also going to add some height to this cliff here to help make them look the same height. And it also helps that little sort of waterfall you can see at the top right to make a little bit more sense as well. I'm not sure how, yeah, there we go. I fixed it now. I just went to pick a bright color. I didn't use white. For some reason, I could have very well used white there, not only because it's a reflection, but because there's a presence of foam. So I could have done that, but I just prefer to use the bright tone. So here I am chipping away at some of the surfaces on the wall, again adding more interest, breaking up straight lines. Even though this is isometric, I do not want this to look like a box. I know that there's a lot of pixel art, isometric pixel art out there that strives on that sort of really boxy, interesting, stylized look, but I didn't want that for this one in particular. Also trying to get rid of some of these outlines back here, especially in the inline surfaces, so the near edge. I don't want that ever to be there. I just want them to be on overlapping surfaces or proper outlines. Also, doing some of this stuff like adding the grass there kind of creates a union between two surfaces and two materials that aren't supposed to be. You know, the towers are supposed to be sitting on the grass. They're not supposed to be fading into the grass. But you have some overlapping elements. You can kind of make them work together in the same environment. In this case, I made just a huge chip on that tower. I'm trying to shade it like there's a hole between the top of the tower into the inside of the tower. And that preview there was just the layer, the new layer with what it's got added on. Now I'm going to do some what's it called? It's probably called a standard, but I'm just going to call them banners. Yeah, that's good enough for me. So the banners are going to be this sort of deep crimson, and but the top is going to be slightly brighter, just because I want them to have a little bit of volume. It's also a great opportunity to cast shadows on surfaces and yet add more detail to with almost no cost. But the advantage is that the viewer will easily understand what that's about. And this one I make it a little even more dark, even darker, that is. I thought about adding another one, but just thought I was overdoing it. This is supposed to be like a really, place where they go to hide for a bit, not a huge camp. I wanted to change the perspective on this emblem, but it was so weird that I just left it the way it is. So that's one thing that is wrong about that. Now, looking at the tree now, we're going to create the texture for a clump of leaves on a tree, like the top of the end of a branch. And by doing that, what I'm essentially doing is I'm creating a module. I'm creating a piece of foliage that I can then replicate. And I've done this numerous times in stuff like clouds and grass. And it's a real cheat, but it works well enough. Now, again, this piece is not about the trees or about my capacity to do the foliage. This is about an isometric sort of scene. But so I really want to speed it up with the leaves. I don't want to, spend my whole day doing trees. Some people might like that. I'm not, if I have to, but I'd rather not. So I always find that the like cheapest tricks to do stuff like that. So I'm just basically cloning the tree elements, and you can see that in the end, it's not going to be very difficult from if you're doing a video game and you're using tiles to create the tree tops and stuff like that. I'm also doing the same here, but what I do is I create a shape from the walls. And by creating the shape from the walls, what I do is I create a mask for the parts of the tree that I want to stay behind of the tower, but also the parts that I then want to move forward. And I just take some of those clumps of trees and I move them forward. Here I'm doing the same. I'm erasing a mask. I'm creating a mask for those, so there's that bush over there, and I'm taking all the colors and bringing them down one tone so that they all become darker. And the point for that is I'm just doing layering. I'm also taking the group of clumps of leaves and turning them into a flat layer and just creating the outlines really fast for those. So that's what it ended up looking like. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.